when you think about it that way, ensuring that a crisis doesn't happen is critically important. So this preparation, these things that you can put in place beforehand, make that really bad day a lot less bad and a lot more manageable, and then helps you get back onto task a lot faster if you do the work beforehand.
Well, welcome back to The Business Behind Your Business. I'm your host, Paul Sweeney, and look, we're going to address today that horrible feeling you get as a business owner or a business leader, and you've woken up and something incredibly terrible has gone wrong, either in your business or affecting your business, and you are the person that needs to deal with it. So how do we address that? A lot of times we've gone, okay, that's not going to happen to me, but the reality of it is going to happen. It's just a matter of when and how are you going to be prepared for it. And as always, we've brought in the experts to help us unpack this topic. And look, I'm delighted to welcome Stephanie Craig to The Business Behind Your Business. Stephanie's from Kith Consulting, but that's just the tip of the iceberg of her experience and skill set. Stephanie is from the United States, but also some very strong roots in Canada. Stephanie's experience with not just with corporates, but politics, all kinds of business, media. Stephanie, share a bit more of like who you are and what your experience is in this kind of situation.
Paul, I am thrilled to be with you, and I think you kind of hit it nail on the head when you said iceberg. So you mentioned Canada. I was born in the Canadian Arctic. My dad was one of those, was a Mountie, so you know those guys with the jackets and the red jackets and the hat. So I got to live all over Canada. I chose an early life in politics, and I've had the chance, and likely the only person, we don't know how to verify this, to have ever worked in the U.S. House and Senate and the Canadian House and Senate. But my love of politics continued my moving around, and I think I've tallied 19 different cities in 2 different countries at this point, and I have loved absolutely every minute of it. I now, as you mentioned, I lead an organization called Kith. We are much more management consultants than we are communications consultants. You generally see crisis landing with very capable communicators, and we always say that communications teams need to be a part of any crisis solution, but we are much more management consultants. I have gained most of my experience in this world from doing crisis or turnaround. Campaigns and politics are always crisis. And then after that, I went into some consulting firms and with some new media organizations to help them do some turnarounds. And it has been just a really wonderful career that I've got to have, and it has never been dull, and I've learned a lot from it in managing crisis, and through that I've also figured out that there's also a better way to handle crisis, and that's to prepare for it. And so I'm traveling and digitally traveling the world, talking to people about there is a better way to do crisis management, and that is to do crisis preparedness.
Absolutely. And I would say that most business owners still have the view that managing the crisis is something that they can do when it occurs. And I've got better things to do with my time than prepare for something that may not actually happen. But we all know that that's not the case, that crisis will happen. And we've got some pretty big examples of crisis that have occurred. Some come to mind. But look, when we talk about a crisis, is there some kind of definition that we can just sort of tie in? What are we actually talking about here?
Well, so we have a very loose definition of crisis, and that's because a crisis to one person may not be a crisis to another person. So a crisis, the way we define it, is it's whatever knocks you off your game, whatever prevents you from doing business as usual. And that for somebody, if you are a digital company being knocked offline, if you make widgets, your factory goes down or there's a fire, different crises, but yet very impactful. And we focus on the intersection of operations and reputation. And the reason that we say that is reputation they've settled on 35% of a company's value. And think about anything else in a business that comprises 35% of your value, and you want to protect it. And anything that is out of the ordinary. So a fire at your widget making plant, your CFO absconding with your pension fund, having one of your brand ambassadors do something idiotic. All of these things hit your reputation. And something we preach religiously is the difference between reputation and brand. A brand is something you pay for. You pay for the graphic design, you pay for the advertising, you pay for the promotion. A reputation is something that your stakeholders give you. They own it. The people that matter to you are the people that own your reputation. And to quote Warren Buffett, a reputation takes 25 years to develop and 5 minutes to destroy. So when you think about it that way, ensuring that a crisis doesn't happen is critically important. So this preparation, these things that you can put in place beforehand, make that really bad day a lot less bad and a lot more manageable, and that helps you get back onto task a lot faster if you do the work beforehand.
That's the key there. Like, how quickly can we get back to where we need to be? And sometimes it might not be exactly where we were before, but it might actually, in some cases, be a better place.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, what is a crisis? I love that definition, because if I talk to my teenagers, their definition of a crisis would be that the Wi-Fi signal's dropped out, because that's just life-threatening. But for a lot of businesses, we tend to think of crisis as an external. A lot of people think of it as an external event that has an immediate effect on their environment. Obviously, COVID was a huge one, but bushfires, flooding, even, I guess, snow, which is, I'm hearing more and more the effects of snow on business. But we tend to think of those external factors, but there are also a lot more immediate factors, or I guess localized factors, like a supplier going out of business, or a customer going into liquidation, or maybe that fire is not in your factory, but it's in the supplier's factory. How are you going to handle that?
Well, and people think that that's a siloed crisis. Oh, well, that's, we can't, we don't have cans to put our soda in. Okay, but if you think down the line, that means you're going to have a shortage of things on the shelf. So the people that are loyal to you are going to show up at their grocery store, and they're not going to have that soda. So that is a reputation problem, because they're going to go to somebody else. And so I think that's very much the first step when you're preparing, which is your organization has to have an understanding of what a crisis is for you. There has to be an understanding throughout the company of what a crisis is. Because if one person thinks that the light bulb being out is a crisis and somebody else thinks that it's an earthquake, you're going to have very, very different responses, and you're going to have a lot of henny penny as the sky is falling. So everybody needs to be on that same page. And we have a way of talking about being prepared. It's a little bit of a formula. And so it's clarity in the people who you value, your values, and what the people that you value, what they value. So a real clarity in who you are, who your most important people are, the people that hold your reputation, and where they gather, where they communicate, what they value. You should know that. So clarity plus trust. So trust in the people, the processes, and the policies that are put in place to prevent a crisis. So when I talk about people knowing their roles, understanding the values. So when you're making a decision on, we'll use Bud Light, when you're making a decision about, okay, I'm going to send a package to an influencer, I don't think they thought about the other part of their ecosystem that was going to get really upset about that. And so if you're going to make that decision and it is strategic and you make that decision intentionally, that's great. The crisis, you should have prepared for it. So understanding kind of the people in your ecosystem, understanding the values, understanding what everybody does in the midst of a crisis, and then the policies and procedures. For instance, practice. Have a plan, practice it. It doesn't have to be anything any more than holding up your industry publication. It could be on your iPad, your iPhone, or if you're old school, the newspaper, and saying, if this happened to us, what would we do? It doesn't have to be a convoluted, expensive, which I'm happy to help people for that large expense, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be as simple as just saying every week at a staff meeting, what would we do if this happened to us? And if you don't know, that's when you need to call us, because you are really far behind or as we would say, behind the 8 ball, because you don't know what to do if this happened. And this just happened to a competitor, somebody in your ecosystem, and it very well could have happened to you. So it very well could have been your bad day.
Yeah, and I like that idea of meeting together and going through what would our response be, or how would we handle this, because there's a couple of things here that I see a lot of with business owners, and I'm particularly going to drill down on male business owners of my generation. So I'm in my 50s, but we tend to think that one, it won't happen to me, and two, I have to deal with everything, and three, I'm the only one that can come up with a solution. So there was something that you mentioned as we were preparing for this recording about how we approach, I guess, these ideas of crisis and what our plan is. And you talked about talking through with staff just then, but also how we approach the way that we approach crisis, or how we plan for it ourselves personally.
Well, it's very much a mindset, and you see this in certain functions in organizations, lawyers, for instance. What does the bad day look like? But for most of us, we don't want to think about what our worst day looks like. And I was thinking about kind of crisis. I'm giving a talk in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks, and I was thinking around that. And what makes me want, as a career, what makes me want to think about what is next, and really think 2 and 3 steps down the path, and really want to work in people's worst days, to be honest with you. And it's very much the mindset of walking yourself through the worst day makes the worst day less bad. And it is a mindset that I gained when I was a competitive figure skater. And I was actually very young when I went competitive, and so the older girls used to push me to the sides, and I had to jump really close to the boards, and it was really scary. And my coach said to me, think about how you are going to do this every step of the way. What does it look like when you take off? What do you look like in the air? How do you land? And you walk yourself through it. So then it's not as scary. And I can prepare it every step of the way to land that jump positively. And as I thought about this, I realized it's what I've done throughout my career. In politics, you have to think about, what are the first ripple? What's the second ripple? What's the third ripple? What's the fourth ripple? You have to walk yourself through all of the things that could happen. And once you've done that, once you've figured out how to manage every single step of that, it's not as scary. And the mindset of saying, okay, I need to walk myself through, I need to prepare myself and troubleshoot through our very worst possible day, is actually going to make that really bad day not as bad. But most people don't like to think about that. Or I think you said to me earlier, it's somebody else's responsibility. It's really not. As a leader, it is your responsibility to set the tone that I value this organization so much that I am willing to put in the time, effort, and money to protect it.
I guess sometimes the ownership of the problem as a business owner is sometimes a case of identifying that you are not the right person. And like you might have the mindset, oh, okay, we need to prepare for this, but it's not a skill set I have. So who can I turn to help prepare my business, realizing that I don't have that skill set, but I need somebody on board that does.
Mhm. Well, and it's something that we do with our clients is we create core crisis teams because that way there's a mindset of people that have expertise that they bring to the table. You know, folks can always call somebody like me if they want that expertise, but there's a lot of in-house stuff that you can do. And that core crisis team are the folks that work together to build that trust, to build that clarity. And I didn't finish the equation. The clarity plus trust equals strategic speed. And speed is the differentiator between being a good crisis outcome and getting back to business or being a front page story. And so having this core crisis team is critically important. And the people on this team, they either have to be able to make a decision or they have to have a subject matter expertise. And if they have both, woohoo, awesome. And those folks are the ones that direct crisis preparation. They're the ones that put in the budget crisis exercises, crisis management exercises. And sometimes there are instances where the chief executive, the leader of the whole organization, is not part of that crisis team because they have so much weight in decision making that the people that have developed this expertise cannot make the right decision because the person that is in charge disagrees with them. And so in those instances, what we've done is we've said, okay, what you need to get to a point where you have 3 options and then present the 3 options. But this president of a university, like, she cannot sit in on this decision making because her opinion matters so much that no one's going to get to the right place. And so I think that's also a self-awareness as a leader that, I am so influential in this that I say, I bless you all to do this. And then when you come to me with the 3 decisions, I can make one because I've trusted you to get us crisis prepared. So I think you're very right in that self-reflection of saying, okay, I'm not the right person. And then also understanding your weight within the organization.
Yeah, I think we tend to, when we delegate the responsibility for a function, and in this case, we're talking about crisis preparedness. I'm not talking about management, I'm talking about getting prepared. But when we delegate, we need to, I think, give that team, or even if it's just one person, you might have a small organization, that team, you need to give them, I guess, the authority to act, and as well as the responsibility, but also trust the outcomes that team are going to come up with.
And you have to give them the budget.
Oh yeah.
I think that's something that so many people forget to do is to give this function money, and that's really important. And I'd like to make a plug out there for all the brilliant communicators that don't always have a seat at the leadership table. Those folks in communications, and if you don't have a communications person, please go get one. If not for just the simple fact that they are the people that look out. They have the sole responsibility of protecting your reputation. That is their job. And if you do have a communications person, set them in that core crisis team. It's up to you whether you want them on your leadership team. That's fine. But in a crisis preparation situation, you need to have your communications person sitting there understanding how you are going about things, because they really troubleshoot in a lot of ways that other business functions don't. But I also want people to think about how crisis preparedness manifests itself in different functions. That if you talk about let's go back to clarity on your values. Your values have to show up not just in your commercials, not just in your marketing materials. They have to show up in your HR policies, in who you do business with, in who is in your business. The things that you value have to permeate your entire business because that mitigates crisis. If you're not deviating in hiring from your core values, it's less of an opportunity for a crisis to grow, because there's not a disconnect between who you're telling your stakeholders you are and who you actually are.
So I guess we say it's not just talking the talk, you've actually got to walk it, and you've got to lead it. You've got to lead that conversation. You've got to lead that well, through your own actions, and being 100% true to what you say you're going to do.
Absolutely. I can say that a lot more succinctly. Walk the walk and talk the talk, then walk the walk.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of getting prepared, and we mentioned that a lot of businesses and a lot of smaller businesses don't have the skill set in-house. What kind of resources should they be engaging to help with this getting prepared for a crisis?
Well, I think that the very first thing that I suggested, holding up your industry publication. We've started a free service that we call it Crisis of the Month. The in-house working title is Oh Crap. And so it's not publicly called that, but it is. And basically it's a Substack that we send out every month that says, here's your scenario. We've taken a real world scenario and asked a number of questions that gets folks started on just thinking about crisis preparedness, and helps them ask the questions internally of what would this happen to us. Last month, it was about Starbucks changing their policy on purchasing a drink to sit in a store. And our point about it was not, are you going to Starbucks or not? That wasn't it. How would your stakeholders, your customers react if you changed a major policy that may or may not align with your values? How would they react? And the response to this has been really good, because it helps people say, okay, crisis of the month has arrived, put me on the agenda. And they go in, they read the scenario, and then they discuss the 4 questions. And that for us is a really great way to get started. For your audience, we've put together a little one-pager that is on our website. It's kith.co/business behind your business, and just where there's a little download for you guys to get started. And I do these podcasts, obviously, come work with us. Love that. But also, I really want to evangelize that this can be done. You can prepare. And when you've built your own business, I think it's different if you're gone to, you go to work for somebody else and, you're committed. But it's a little different than if you've built your own business, or if you're in a startup, or, you're even in a small company. There's a different sense of ownership that you want to protect your business. And I beg you, please do. Please do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking, so many businesses, the crisis and the oh crap is probably a mild way of what actually gets said when the crisis does really happen, when you wake up and it's there. But there's so many instances I'm thinking of, even just with some of our clients. We've talked about a supplier that goes into liquidation, that employee that is terminated incorrectly and starts causing problems. Internet disruptions, disruptions to supply. There's so many things. Being prepared, that sounds like a great resource to me. Something that we'll certainly be looking at, because things happen. And look, I love the way you just mentioned about the Starbucks example, because a lot of us go to make a change in the way that we do business, and often that change is it may even be a case of you've come and seen me and I've given you some advice of something you need to change in your business, and it might be something as simple as your collection policy for your accounts receivable. But how you communicate that to your clients, and how do you communicate that so you don't create offense or a disgruntled customers who will take their business elsewhere? How do you actually go about that? So that comes back to preparing for that crisis and how you can avoid it actually happening. Great tools and resources, and I think we really should be treating this as a mandatory exercise in our team meetings.
Well, and I even, my stepdaughter is in a roommate drama. She's a sophomore in college, and they moved off campus into an apartment, and it's 3 quantum physics students. So very, very analytical folk. And one of their roommates is a very, 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 very messy person. And so they've asked him to move out. And so, helping them navigate all of the things that come with asking somebody to move out and, getting them to sign the papers and all these things. And her roommate, the second roommate, and she FaceTimed me on the regular to talk them through this. And they were a little shocked. And I said, well, did you guys see this coming? And they looked at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, when you guys decided to live together and when you got the apartment, who was the most irresponsible? Who was the person that couldn't really figure out how to get you a cashier's check for the deposit? Who was the person that couldn't show up on time to look at the apartment? And Jenna, of course, started rolling her eyes because she knew what was coming. And her roommate didn't. Her roommate totally didn't see what was coming. Said, you guys should have seen this coming. And I said, so this is the lesson. We will bail you out this time. We will not bail you out again because you should have seen this coming. And it's even just little situations like that you learn to see. And I think your HR example is really interesting to me because if you have some standards that are value-based, clarity, your open communication, very clear communication, if that is part of one of your values and that's something that you make sure is instituted in your hiring process, then you are going to get people that want to be clear communicators. So the siloing, the bad penny within an organization doesn't get through because you've included your values in your hiring process. One of my dear friends, she thankfully was not the head of the organization, but they had somebody who was let go, and she took a lawn chair for 3 weeks and sat in front of their building with a little protest sign. And she'd been let go for a cause, but how do you handle that? How do you handle? And she just looked at me, she's like, can you help? I said, absolutely not. I'm like, you guys, your office is right next to CBS News. No, you guys did this. You got to figure it out. And eventually, she moved on, but it's so much about how you handle things that can make really bad situations not so bad.
Yeah. It doesn't always stop the situation from happening, but it's that how we control that outcome, how we've planned for it, what are the steps we're going to take when this arises. And when you know what you're going to do, if you, I guess, preparing for your worst day, if you've already walked through your plan of how you're going to go through that, then when the crisis actually occurs, the panic is not there. You've got that calmness, you've got that mental approach that says, I know how to respond here, and this is what I'm going to do.
Right. And it's without question. It's not grabbing a binder off a shelf and dusting it off and saying, okay, I got to turn to page 3 and then page 34 and then back to page 10 before you can figure out what to do. As a team, you intrinsically know what you need to do. And I want to add a little thing about the lawn chair protest, that because my friend's organization had let their stakeholders know who they are and they built trust with their stakeholders, this lawn chair protest didn't have a huge effect because they're like, oh, that's such an anomaly. And so part of that understanding of your intrinsic crisis mitigation responsibilities are building trust with your stakeholders. So when it happens, they're on your side. And this is an ongoing process, and that process should build what we call a crisis muscle, that when something happens, you can identify it. Right? We talked about at the beginning. You all have a common understanding of what a crisis looks like, so there's no describing it. You know how you're going to react because you have the values of it. You know who's going to do what because you've determined that, and you know how you're going to communicate to the people that matter to you most. So you can mitigate the crisis, because that's where the crisis comes from. It doesn't come from the broader world. If somebody is talking about your product and they don't ever buy your product, and they can't buy your product because they live in another country or something like that, they don't matter to you. The people that matter to you and how they react is what's important.
Absolutely. So we've learned some key skills today, and also some key process we need to implement. But we've also got access to some key resources. So encourage everybody to reach out. Go to kith.co/business behind your business. We're going to put the link in the show notes, so you don't need to pull out of the car and take that down. You can look it up after. Also check out on the businessbehindyourbusiness.com website for show notes and links to the resources and some more information about kith.co and Stephanie and some of the work that she's been doing and the solutions she's implemented. Worth checking out. But if you don't do anything else today, start thinking about what could go wrong and how you're going to respond. I think would that be a fair summary of the one key thing that people need to take away?
Absolutely, Paul. Bravo. That is the one thing. If you do nothing else today, think about the things that go wrong and how you would respond. 100%.
Fantastic. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It seems a bit weird to be enjoying a conversation talking about crisis, but I'm enjoying the fact that we've got the expertise on board to help us understand what we should be doing to prepare for the crisis, not just manage and how we respond with communication, but prepare for it so that we can make it something that we can return to, I guess, normal operations as soon as possible. Maybe even in a stronger position afterwards. But great advice today from Stephanie, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you have as well. And look, if you think there is another business owner, business leader that needs to hear this message as well, please share this episode with them. Encourage them to listen to and subscribe to the Business Behind Your Business podcast. We would certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure that they will appreciate getting access to some of these great conversations and advice that we've been having. So Stephanie, thank you again. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and I'd love to steer more of our listeners towards you, and that you could help more and more people avoid crisis.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been just a joy.
Okay, thank you.